is 8 p.m. in London, 10 p.m. in Jerusalem, 4 a.m. in Seoul, and 3 p.m. here in Atlanta. I'm Lynda Kinkade in today for Jim Sciutto. Thanks so much for joining us for this edition of CNN Newsroom. Well, let's get right to the news. And thousands in Israel are taking to the streets as another day passes without a hostage deal. The anger, the grief, the frustration is being felt right across the country after Hamas murdered 6 hostages. One of the victims was an Israeli American, Hirsch Goldberg Poland, who had just been injured on October 7th. And for 330 days, his parents advocated tirelessly for his release. Well, today at his funeral, Hirsch's mother, Rachel, spoke to the thousands who came to remember her son.
When you wrote to us from the bomb shelter, you had just seen Honor get killed. You had lost your arm and you thought you were dying. And you wrote to us, "I'm sorry," because you knew how crushing it would be for us to lose you. So you fought to stay alive. And now you are gone.
101 hostages remain in Gaza. At least 35 of those are believed to be dead. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is facing significant criticism from the public and international allies for not doing enough to secure a deal. At a press conference hours ago, Netanyahu asked for forgiveness, but said Israel will not leave the Philadelphia corridor, a key sticking point in negotiations.
I'm asking for your forgiveness that we didn't manage to bring them back alive. We were very close, but we couldn't make it.
CNN international diplomatic editor Nick Robertson is in Tel Aviv. Good to have you with us, Nick. So that was a rare press conference. Netanyahu both apologizing, but then also trying to justify his reasoning for choosing to keep Israeli forces in the Philadelphia corridor between Egypt and Gaza over more of the pressing matter to bring the hostages home. What do you make of his statement, and can he withstand the public pressure to bring those hostages home?
I don't think his words this evening are going to change the public pressure. Opinions are pretty much made up here. He might continue to keep some of his supporters at his side, and he might be able to signal to Hamas that he's not going to change his position. This was a rare act of contrition by him. This is not something that's easily done by Prime Minister Netanyahu. He was under a lot of pressure from opposition politicians to do this, to show that he cares, to show that the critics who say that he puts the hostages' lives secondary to his own political career and to destroying Hamas, to prove them wrong in a way. But these words, I don't think, are going to change the dynamic of the protests and the effort to try to get him to change his position. That's the bigger pressure that he's under at the moment is recognizing that Hamas is now ready to brutally execute hostages who are still alive, potentially as part of a negotiating tactic or whatever it is. The reality has become much closer, therefore, that all those other hostages, the 60 or so are believed to be alive, are in imminent mortal danger. And the pressure on Netanyahu is get them home before they too are killed. And what the Prime Minister outlined here is a doubling down of his insistence that Israel has to keep troops on the Philadelphia corridor, the border between Gaza and Egypt, because he said if they don't, Hamas will dig more tunnels and bring more weapons into Gaza and strengthen their position. And that's something he said he wasn't going to allow to happen. Well, Hamas has made their position very clear as well. They've said that for them to agree a deal, there has to be no troops in Gaza. This is a point where there is no meeting of the minds, no area where there seems to be enough overlap to get to get some kind of a deal through. So despite all those pressures, the contrition was perhaps the easiest to give. He certainly doesn't appear to be backing down on his central theme.
Yeah, exactly. During that entire presentation with a map illustrating his point and defense of that sticking point. But of course, this was not part of the original negotiations, the ceasefire and hostage deal. So where does this, the fact that Netanyahu is doubling down, where does that leave the ceasefire and hostage negotiations going forward?
You know, you really have to look at it and say it leaves it in limbo. And look, everyone's going to continue to try. The interlocutors in Qatar, in Egypt will continue. President Biden has met with his key national security team to try to, and his negotiating team to try to figure out where they're at. I mean, I think when you hear that, you understand that this is at a very, very difficult position to find a way forward. But clearly they're going to try. It's not there. I don't think look. As much as the Prime Minister said he thought they were close to getting them out, as much as President Biden has said we're close, as much as Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said we're close, the reality has proven they're not close, and I think they're further away than they were.
Yeah, it's a sad but true statement. Nick Robertson for us in Tel Aviv. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, US President Joe Biden met with the US negotiating team in the Situation Room earlier today. Biden says he is preparing to present a final ceasefire and hostage proposal and does not believe Netanyahu is doing enough to secure a deal. CNN White House correspondent Arlette Saenz joins us now. Good to have you with us. So, Arlette, Biden is expected to put more pressure on Mr. Netanyahu to get a ceasefire deal done, but certainly today, saying that Mr. Netanyahu is not doing enough, that certainly those comments were certainly felt wide and far across the region in the Middle East.
Yes, Lynda, they were certainly very blunt and terse comments from President Biden when he was asked here at the White House whether he believes Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is doing enough to try to secure a deal. It comes as there is a real sense of urgency among U.S. officials to keep working towards securing some type of agreement to ensure that those hostages are released and that there is some type of ceasefire in place in the war in Gaza. But I want to play for you a little bit of what President Biden told reporters earlier today when he was specifically asked about Netanyahu. Take a listen.
Do you think it's time for Prime Minister Netanyahu to do more on this issue? Do you think he's doing enough?
No.
Now, those comments did bristle some Israeli officials. You know, President Biden has been quite reluctant to criticize Netanyahu in public. Instead, he's tried to exert pressure in private. But you have seen these various tension points, including today, emerging between the two leaders. Now, as the president was departing the White House a short while ago, I asked President Biden specifically what he wants to see Netanyahu do. He simply said that they are still negotiating. That is the way that he answered several questions relating to a potential ceasefire and hostage deal as he was departing the White House this afternoon for Pittsburgh. Now, earlier today, the president did convene his national security team, including those who are part of the negotiations to try to secure this deal. They met in the White House Situation Room. In that meeting, President Biden, the White House said, expressed his outrage over the deaths of those 6 hostages at the hands of Hamas, including that Israeli-American Hersh Goldberg Poland, and also talked to his team about the latest steps they could take relating to this deal. President Biden has expressed some cautious optimism that they are very close to presenting a final deal to the negotiators, but it will all depend on what is happening on the ground there, what is happening in those conversations, to see whether they can actually get any type of agreement across the finish line at this time.
All right, Arlette Saenz outside the White House. Thanks very much. Well, for more on this, I want to welcome Aviv, the former editor-in-chief for the Jerusalem Post. Good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
So Mr. Netanyahu today was trying to explain his reasoning for keeping troops in the Philadelphia corridor, this stretch of land between Gaza and Egypt, which is a key sticking point in the negotiations, instead of making it a priority to bring the hostages home. And of course, yesterday, the defense minister called the cabinet's decision to stay there a moral disgrace. What did you make of the press conference?
Look, I think on the one hand, he was trying to appear compassionate. He appeared to be choking up when he read out the names of those hostages who were executed by Hamas just a few days ago. We just had the last funeral a few minutes ago here in Israel. The entire country is really wrapped in grief. And I think he was sort of speaking to that at the beginning of the press conference. But then, as your correspondent said, he returned to his erstwhile position, saying, Israel has to remain in the Philadelphia corridor. We cannot allow a situation where Hamas can smuggle in weapons, individuals, cash freely as it has up until now. He said that is what enabled Hamas to carry out the atrocities of October 7th. So Israel needs to maintain a physical presence along that corridor, which of course is a major sticking point in the negotiations between Israel and Hamas in the attempt to reach some kind of a ceasefire and hostage deal.
I mean, we saw these widespread, nationwide protests today. Talk to us about the mood in Israel, because some families of hostages said they hope that this is a turning point. Is it?
Look, when you described the atmosphere earlier as one of grief and anger and frustration, I think that is exactly apt. That is exactly what so many of us are feeling today. It is a collective grief. The names of those hostages have become household names. Certainly, Hersh Goldberg Poland is a name that is known outside of Israel, but all the others are known very well inside Israel as well. And so we all feel as though we've lost a member of our own family. And then that turns to frustration as to why it is that they were still there. What more could Israel have done in order to bring them home, which is how you saw these hundreds of thousands of Israelis swarm the streets of Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and other cities, calling for a deal at pretty much any cost at this point, just to bring those remaining hostages home, as many as we possibly can alive, and then certainly the bodies of those who no longer are.
Of course, we heard from Rachel, the mother of Hersh, today, speaking, just giving a heartbreaking, her thoughts on her son and whether she did enough to bring him home, asking for forgiveness for not doing enough. Do you think the pressure that's growing for Netanyahu to do more will help him see the light, or do you think his political future is more important at this point in time?
Well, look, the Goldberg Polands live in my neighborhood here in Jerusalem. Her grace, her determination over the past few months have been simply incredible to witness. I've had the opportunity to meet with both her and her husband, John, on numerous occasions. And I think that pressure really has helped keep the hostages in the public eye and in the public consciousness around the world. That itself has played a certain role in ensuring that we are keeping our eye on the ball and doing whatever we can to bring those hostages home. I don't think that Netanyahu is opposed in principle to bringing the hostages home. I think he very much wants to do that, but he has to take into account both security concerns and his own political survival. He feels, rightly or wrongly, that Israel must maintain that presence along the Philadelphia corridor in order to prevent Hamas from using it as a smuggling route, as it has for so many years. And of course, he's also deeply concerned that the right-wing members of his coalition will bolt and essentially bring down his government if he proceeds with a deal that they don't find satisfactory. And so he has to balance many different concerns at once. But I certainly think that he, as I think of many Israelis, deeply concerned about the fate of the hostages and very much wants to bring them home as swiftly as possible.
Avi Maya, great to get your perspective, joining us live from Jerusalem. Thanks so much.